Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. Thank you for your time. Goodbye. Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. A recently released book seeks to disabuse the Indian people about preconceived notions they might have of how to handle Pakistan. At the same time, it also seeks to educate them about what the book calls silver linings in Pakistan, which are aspects of the country which are either not known in India or not fully understood. Here is the book. It's called India's Pakistan Conundrum, and its author is a former High Commissioner to Pakistan and a former Central Information Commissioner, Sharat Sabharwal. Mr. Sabharwal now joins me to talk about his book and the very important points he makes about how we should learn to view our neighboring country. Mr. Sabharwal, as I said in that introduction, at one level, your book seeks to disabuse Indians of certain ideas they have about how to handle Pakistan. First, you point out it's not in India's interest to promote the disintegration of Pakistan. You write, the resulting chaos will not leave India untouched. What are your fears on this count?
Well, as you rightly say, Karan, in this book, I try to address the misperceptions that have characterized the Indian national discourse on Pakistan, and largely because of the justified anger of our people at its conduct over the years. And one of them is that Pakistan is going to disintegrate. And then going a step forward, there are those in our strategic community who say that we should act actively to secure the disintegration of Pakistan. And for the reasons that I have examined in my book, my conclusion is that the chances of a change in the external boundaries of Pakistan remain low. Although widespread lawlessness would continue to characterize Pakistan because of various reasons, including religious extremism. As far as India acting actively to ensure the disintegration of Pakistan is concerned, I believe that the resulting chaos will not leave us untouched. Look, Karan, I pointed out ever so often to my audiences in Pakistan about the heavy price that they were paying for destabilizing their neighbor Afghanistan. Now, let's assume for a minute that the central authority disappears in Pakistan. What would we face? We would face either a civil war amongst the successive provinces, or worse still, amongst warring groups vying for influence, as was the case in Afghanistan, or a Punjabi rump sitting on the pile of Pakistan's nuclear weapons. In any case, it will be a bad news for us. This kind of development could also trigger a massive humanitarian crisis for us because of the easy terrain in the plains between the two countries, which offers easy access to people who may be trying to flee unrest in Pakistan. And as I mentioned in my book, in 2009-10, when terrorism was rife in Pakistan, some of my friends would tell me in candid moments in Lahore that if the Taliban came here, we'll have no option but to run towards India. So therefore, I say that please think carefully before you wish for disintegration of Pakistan.
Now, the second idea that you seek to disabuse the Indian people of is their belief that India has the capacity to inflict a decisive military blow on Pakistan in conventional terms. You point out that Pakistan's nuclear weapons have effectively ruled this out. You write, and I'm quoting you, the nuclear dimension has made it extremely risky, if not impossible, for India to give a decisive military blow to Pakistan to coerce it into changing its behavior. Now, people will understand that it's risky to try and give a military blow to another nuclear power state, but at the same time, here you are hitting at a cherished belief that we've all held since 1971, that India has the capacity to defeat Pakistan. You're now pointing out that actually Pakistan's nuclear weapons have ensured you mustn't try this.
Well, this part of my book, Karan, is addressed to those in our strategic community who say that our Pakistan problem can be addressed purely through military means. And all that I'm saying here is that in examining that assumption, you must not lose sight of the nuclear dimension to the conflict. Now, here, it's not my case that the nuclear dimension has altogether eliminated the space for conventional military action by India. After all, Kargil showed that there is space for that kind of action. And then we crossed a very significant threshold in mounting an air attack on a terror target in Pakistan proper after Pulwama at Balakot. Now here, it could be, assumed that India can inflict military defeat on Pakistan. These actions, which I have just spoken of, now they are not capable of securing an enduring change in Pakistan's behavior. For that, we need to give a decisive military blow to Pakistan, something on the scale of Bangladesh. Now, there are those in our strategic community who would question whether we have the conventional military capability to give that kind of blow. I'm not a military expert, but let's assume that we have that kind of capability or that we can acquire it over a period of time. What this kind of conflict would mean is that we run into the red lines for use of their nuclear weapons laid down by Pakistan. And they are discussed in my book. I wouldn't wish to go into them here. Well, members of our strategic community have been examined how to circumvent the nuclear dimension, and they would continue to do so. But here is the bottom line. An elected prime minister sitting in South Block has to authorize a consequential military action against Pakistan in the knowledge that it could by accident or by design go into the nuclear domain. And you can imagine how difficult that decision would be. So therefore, I come to the conclusion that while the nuclear dimension in this region has given us an advantage vis-a-vis militarily and economically more powerful China, but it has made it extremely risky, if not impossible, for us to give Pakistan the kind of military blow that would be essential to secure an enduring change in its behavior.
Absolutely. Now, the third notion that you seek to disabuse the Indian people of is the belief that India can use trade to punish Pakistan. You write, use of trade as an instrument to punish Pakistan is both short-sighted and ineffective because of the relatively small volume of Pakistani exports to India. So even though Pakistan would benefit probably hugely from greater trade with India, stopping that trade altogether would not cause Pakistan very much punishment or pain.
Let me recall that we gave MFN status, most favored nation status, to Pakistan in 1996, but Pakistan never reciprocated it. But our advice, Karan, to Pakistan all along was that don't link trade to political issues. At the same time, each time there was an India-Pakistan crisis, there were members of our strategic community, large segments, who would recommend that we should withdraw the MFN status, which had not been reciprocated. We finally went against our own advice, which we had been giving to Pakistan, and we took that step in the wake of Pulwama, and we increased the customs duty on imports from Pakistan by 200%. I believe that this was justified purely as a retaliatory move, purely to assuage the Indian public opinion, but that it did not have the potential to change the calculus of Pakistan's establishment. Let me explain why. Now, Pakistan's exports to India at that time were in the range of $300 to $400 million per annum, which is less than 2% of Pakistan's global exports at that time. Now, I don't know what the volume of their exports today is, But assuming they lost all those exports, while that would hurt individual exporters in Pakistan, that didn't have the potential to change the calculus of Pakistan's security establishment. Secondly, I haven't seen a credible study which tells you the impact of that move on the Indian consumer. But logically, it follows that because of the increase in the customs duty, the prices of Pakistani imports would have gone up for the Indian consumer. Or if we started importing them from further afield, that would mean higher freight and longer import time. Pakistan took an even more short-sighted step when it suspended trade after we withdrew the special status of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, what that means is that Indian goods and machinery, which has price advantage, goes to Pakistan now through orders placed in third countries and a markup in price for their consumers. I can tell you from what I know that there is a push in the Pakistani business and industry to open trade with India again, but Pakistan's fractious politics rules it out for the moment.
But the important point you're making is that by cutting off trade, we may have punished individual Pakistani exporters, but the nation, the state, did not feel any pain. And the belief in India that we can use trade as a weapon to punish Pakistan is a mistaken belief. In fact, at this point, I want to make clear to the audience that you have very effectively disabused the Indian people of three notions that many people hold about how we should handle Pakistan. Firstly, you're saying it's silly and short-sighted to seek to promote the disintegration of the country. The fallback on us could be very serious. We could have civil war on our borders. We could have a humanitarian crisis. We could have a huge influx of refugees. And worst of all, you could have a Punjabi rump in Pakistan in control of their nuclear weapons. And that could be a state that is very adverse to India. Similarly, you point out the belief that we can deal a military blow to Pakistan is almost impossible now because they have nuclear weapons to hit back with. And any Indian prime minister would have to think very, very carefully before he runs the risk of a Pakistani nuclear response. And thirdly, you point out that dealing with Pakistan in terms of trade as a weapon we use to punish them is actually short-sighted because the trade is so small, it doesn't matter to the state. It may affect exporters in Pakistan, but the state doesn't care about the impact of a trade bar or ban from India. Let's at this point come to the other aspect of your book, where you seek to open the eyes of the Indian audience to what you call silver linings. As I said in the introduction, these are aspects of Pakistan that either Indians are not aware of, or if they are aware of them, they haven't fully understood them or appreciated them. First, you talk about what you call, and I'm quoting, the growing introspection in the media and civil society. Could you explain this point a little further?
Well, look, when I talk of silver linings, I am talking of a few positive developments in Pakistan in an otherwise somber scene facing us, which have come about, which are not strong enough to overcome the resistance of Pakistani establishment for the time being. And perhaps for that reason, either we don't know or we believe that they are too weak. We do not take them into account, it seems to me, in framing our policy always. Now, you talk of introspection. Pakistan, as you know, Karan, has had serious difficulties right from its inception, but its Cold War linkages and its linkages in the Muslim world gave it the confidence and the comfort to continue its adversarial posture towards India. It got a decisive blow in 1971, but it recovered quickly from that because of the same linkages and because it became a frontline state in the jihad against the former Soviet Union in Afghanistan. Now, all that changed the turn of the century with 9/11. With 9/11, Pakistan changed its policy. It was a half-hearted U-turn against the terrorists, but that led to a massive terror backlash within Pakistan by the same instruments that it had created to trouble other countries. Now, what that meant was that there was a great deal of suffering caused to the people. Now, that suffering, proliferation of electronic media channels, the internet revolution, And most importantly, the increasing sign of failure of Pakistan's traditional policies, that has led to a great deal of introspection in Pakistan. And this debate in Pakistan today is far, far more introspective than ever before. Karan, we get excited. I see our WhatsApp
Can I
group.
interrupt? Can I ask you, how is this introspection in the media and civil society a silver lining? Could you explain that point?
You see, there was a time, as I said, after the Afghan war, when the Soviet Union had to exit from Afghanistan. And that's when I went as Deputy High Commissioner to Pakistan. At that time, there was a sense of victory, having driven the mighty Soviet Union out of Afghanistan. Pakistan was conceited in its jihadi fervor. They believed that they could coerce India into making concessions on Kashmir by using the instrumentality of terror, which they were using in a brazen manner. And they had all sorts of beliefs of this sort. There was a belief that Pakistan had to come to the assistance of Muslims all over the world.
But sir, let's not get lost in detail. How is this introspection a silver lining?
No, it's a silver lining because if Pakistan, you see, there are a number of policies that have been followed over the years, and Pakistan thought that they were serving their interests. Now, when the debate becomes more introspective, more and more people realize that those policies are not succeeding. This is written about in the media. This is discussed on TV debates. That obviously is a silver lining for those dealing with Pakistan from outside. That kind of realization has to come. Look, Karan, there are many problems in Pakistan, but a realization has to come within Pakistan that the policies that it has pursued are not succeeding. And in that sense, I think it's a silver lining for us.
Absolutely. What you're saying is that this introspection is encouraging Pakistan to look back and think about what it did, to question whether what it did was right, and therefore it's encouraging a change of attitude and policy. This ferment, this introspection is a positive sign in a country. That's what you're saying.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're right.
Now, the second thing you point out, and you hinted at it a moment ago, is that the proliferation of TV channels and social media means, and I'm quoting you, the population is not dependent on the state for information, including about other countries. This means the Pakistani state cannot control the flow of information. Again, would you explain how this becomes a silver lining?
Well, look, till the turn of the century, most of the people were dependent on the official media, on Pakistan radio, Pakistan TV. Whatever information they gave, that's the only information people had. Now, that media demonized India, said all kinds of things which people believed. All this changed with proliferation of private media, electronic media channels and internet revolution, which is explained, I have explained in some detail in my book. Now, this has made it extremely difficult for Pakistani establishment to control the national narrative as they used to do in the past. So it is a corollary of the introspection that I was talking of. When you have more information, freer flow of information, that leads to more introspection. People then question, what have your policies done to the country so far? In that sense, again, it's a silver lining.
Absolutely. And also, in that sense, it means Pakistan civil society is beginning to approximate India's, just as we do not have a government that controls what we know and how much information we get. That too now is becoming true of Pakistan. They have access to questions and information on the basis of which they can in turn question their government.
Well, the security establishment still tries to control the national narrative, flow of information, etc. But substantially, what you say is right about Pakistan.
Now, the third important silver lining is that you point out the Pakistan army is increasingly questioned not only by the media, but also the political class, civil society, and the judiciary. And these questions, you say, center around the army's claim to be the final arbiter of Pakistan's national interests. Now, to many in India who don't know Pakistan well, this will come as a bit of a surprise. What you're saying is that actually the centrality the army seeks for itself is increasingly being questioned.
Yeah, that's the crux of the matter. The centrality of what the army describes itself as being questioned. Look, the army presents itself as the defender of Pakistan's physical and ideological frontiers and the final arbiter of Pakistan's destiny. It has been under criticism from time to time. For example, after the Bangladesh war debacle, it was criticized. But till the turn of the century again, the atmosphere of fear was such that this criticism was in hush-hush tones, in very hushed tones. I found in 1990s that some of my political interlocutors were reluctant to talk against the army, even in closed-door meetings. Let someone be listening to that conversation. And that has once again changed. Look at the political leadership. Look at the recent developments. The way Nawaz Sharif attacked the army leadership. Look at the way Imran Khan is attacking and his followers are attacking Bajwa today. Civil society, you just have to go to the social media in Pakistan to see what kind of criticism is being leveled against the army. And the judiciary in between hauled up, this was under Iftikhar Chaudhary, a former army chief and a DGISI, for a case in which they had financed a particular political grouping in 1993 election. They took up some corruption cases against generals. They took up the cases of involuntary disappearances in Balochistan and in the frontier areas at the hands of the army. Now, they couldn't go very far because of the resistance of the army. But the fact remains that the army is not an institution which remains unquestioned in the sense in which it was till about the turn of the century. That has all changed.
This is very important because this is something that most Indians are probably unaware of. And if they are aware of it, they haven't really fully taken on board the implications and consequences. Now, there is a hesitant conclusion in your book that emerges both from the issues you believe we should disabuse ourselves of, as well as from the silver linings that you pointed out that people weren't aware of. And the conclusion is this, that the view that Pakistan is an unmitigated disaster, a view that's very commonly held in India, is not wholly correct.
Well, I would again say what I said earlier. I would only repeat. I talk here of a few positive developments in an otherwise very difficult scene in Pakistan. Positive developments which are not strong enough to overcome the entrenched interests of Pakistan's establishment, but which should not be ignored by us because they must grow. This trend must grow, Karan, if Pakistan is ever to become a sensible state. So if a policy ignores all these developments, that would be a flawed policy.
Absolutely. And in a sense, your book is a message to others in the foreign service, as well as politicians who make our policies, that open your eyes and see the reality. And the reality may not be the same as our preconceived notions. It may not be the same either because we haven't given full credit to the silver linings. That's an important message. And yet, the truth is, you're still convinced that Pakistan remains a serious problem for India, not just because of the Kashmir issue, not just because of the terror that's inflicted by state-supported organizations in Pakistan, but because you point out Pakistan is increasingly becoming part of India's larger China problem. Now, this could be potentially very worrying. Could you explain it a bit further?
Look, the gap between India and Pakistan has grown. And in fact, if I might go back to our discussion on introspection, one of the things which was very palpable to me during my tenure as High Commissioner was realization in Pakistan of this gap, and that the past policies were not easy to carry forward, although the interests of the security establishment have ensured that a change is not easy. So the gap has grown. Pakistan's economy is 1/10 of the size of the Indian economy. India's reputation has grown on the international stage. Pakistan has suffered a grave damage as a hub of terrorism. Now, Pakistan, Karan, today is not a significant military threat to us. It is at best a terror irritant which has managed to perpetrate large-scale terror acts from time to time. It is in conjunction with China that it becomes dangerous for us. And in my book, I examine in some detail the China-Pakistan nexus, which is both...
Explain that detail. Tell us briefly, what is it that worries you about that nexus?
No. Look, they are working diplomatically together in many cases. Most recently, China has blocked listing of Pakistan-based terrorists as global terrorists by the UN Security Council. Or, for example, they cooperated after withdrawal of special status of Jammu and Kashmir by us to take the matter to the UN Security Council. Now, it's a different matter. They didn't succeed because of opposition of other members. But militarily, the ties between Pakistan and China have grown manifold. China is the most significant arms exporter to Pakistan today. 70% or more of Pakistan's arms imports are coming from China. My knowledgeable interlocutor in Pakistan would tell me when I was there that the Chinese advice counsel to them was not to get into any big trouble with India. And that probably remains because, after all, the Chinese won't like to get involved in extricating Pakistan from a big trouble with India. But much will depend upon how China's own relationship with India pans out.
And the important point, Mr. Sabharwal, is that if China and Pakistan in any sense are working in tandem, then India has a two-front problem, both diplomatically and militarily.
Yeah, that's what I was coming to. Much depends upon how China's own relationship pans out. Now, if they decide to have a conflict with us on the border issue, they may decide to present us with a two-front problem, which would be a very serious problem for us. So therefore, I say that Pakistan, even though not a significant military threat to us today, is becoming more and more a part of our larger China problem.
And this is why you come to the conclusion that we need dialogue with Pakistan, not, you point out, because it will resolve the problem between the two countries, but because dialogue is a way of managing the relationship with lower levels of volatility and violence. And my question is this: if you're right that dialogue is important for India, we can't turn our back on it because we need to manage the levels of volatility and violence, then your advice is contrary to the practice of this government. This government has effectively shunned dialogue. You're saying dialogue is important because we must contain the volatility and violence.
Look, Karan, in my book, I examine why Pakistan has become a dysfunctional state and an abnormal state. I examine that in great detail. And my conclusion is that this dysfunction is not going to disappear anytime soon because the factors underlying it are immutable in the foreseeable future. Therefore, the conclusion at the end of my book is this: that the best that we can manage in the foreseeable future is to manage best we can do is to manage this relationship by combining deterrence, calibrated and discreet punitive approach as required, but above all, diplomacy and dialogue. This is to manage the relationship well, not to let it go into a state of free fall or leave it entirely to our military sector, as it happened most recently post-Uri, until we went back to the management mode once again with the restoration of ceasefire on the line of
But this is where your advice differs from the practice of this government.
So as far as diplomacy and dialogue is concerned, I make 2 points. One is a general point, and the general point is this: that it's someone who has spent long years in the Foreign Service. I cannot accept the proposition that diplomats have no role even in a most difficult situation. Look, it's very easy. It's for them very easy to give and receive protest notes and voice their national position. But the real challenge lies in finding some common space, even in a most difficult situation. And the second is a specific point which I make. At the moment, Pakistan's fractious politics rules out any significant positive moves towards India. I also do not know what leeway we have in our terror and dogs cannot go together. But what I say is that when dialogue is resumed, as and when dialogue is resumed, the format which has prevailed since 1997, the so-called composite dialogue format, has outlived its utility for various reasons, again explained in my book. And I propose that this should be a freewheeling conversation at the senior official level, let's say at the foreign secretary's level, as has happened in the past also. And their main mandate should be to keep the temperature of the relationship down If they feel that progress can be made in a certain area, they can always commission subject-specific meetings.
One last question before we end this interview. You're recommending and actually endorsing the need for dialogue, although you think the character of the dialogue should be different to what has happened in the past. Here, clearly, you differ with the present government, but let's leave that aside. The question I want to ask is this: should India also seek to open some channel of direct dialogue with the Pakistan army? The British and the Americans talk regularly to the Pakistan army chief, that is separate to their talks with the Pakistan civilian establishment and the Prime Minister. Should we also seek a similar channel?
Well, again, I have examined this issue in detail in my book, but I'll make 2 points. One, engagement with the Pakistan army has not been absent altogether. Look, this restoration of ceasefire, we now know, came because of behind-the-scenes talks between the leaders of our intelligence agencies, not diplomats, but leaders of our intelligence agencies. But nonetheless, talks between ISI on the other side, which is a military instrument.
But should we now have direct talks like the British and the Americans do?
Yeah, so I was coming to that. One, it's not been altogether absent, and I'm not talking of the meetings of field commanders or DGMO's hotline.
And second,
here
I'm pushing you, sir, because we're about to run out of Zoom time. And second?
And the second is my conclusion that we should engage all stakeholders in Pakistan who are willing to engage with us, and that includes the Pakistan army, but with the clear understanding that it's to manage this relationship well for the time being, and not to change its fundamental. If the idea is to talk to the real power center, as it is called, the Pakistan army, to change the fundamentals of the relation, that's not going to happen because of their worldview, which is not changed.
Mr. Sabharwal, I thank you for this interview, and in particular, I thank you for explaining both the areas where the Indian people must disabuse themselves of preconceived notions, and secondly, opening their eyes to what you call silver linings. The important thing is to see Pakistan in the round for the reality it is, rather than try and perceive it and respond in terms of how we think it is, even if the truth is different. Thank you very much indeed for this interview. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you, Karan.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. Thank you for your time. Goodbye.